Hey, folks, welcome into this Week 11 High Point Sports breakdown between the Seahawks and Rams. You got myself, Jesse Moore, with SC Romero. How you doing today, SC?
Doing good, man. Doing good. It's a good divisional battle here. Tell of the tape. One team started off pretty hot and they've gone down. The other team has some struggles, but they're on a good, nice little streak here and they're looking good. So it's just a fun battle in the NFL this week.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting game, I think, from multiple perspectives. On top of that, McVay and the Rams are always a thorn in the Seahawks side. No matter how good the Seahawks are, they just have Seattle's number. Like it just seems like every time we play them, it's just, and this goes back to the Fisher days, like way back in the day,
Mhm.
but it's just for some reason LA, it could be a house of horrors for Seattle. So I guess we can hit on the quarterbacks a little bit. How you feeling about Stafford, him coming back, and how that offense is going to look this week up against the Seahawks defense that's been kind of hit or miss?
I love it. When they played Green Bay a couple weeks ago, my thing was they're probably going to sit Stafford before the news came out that they were, but it made sense because he was hurt, he was banged up, right, and they had a bye week going in, so he had an extra week to heal. But then they also brought in Carson Wentz, so I love that Stafford's there. But if for whatever reason he goes down, I'm more comfortable with Carson Wentz in that offense than I am with Brett Ripien, just because I think Carson Wentz is the better quarterback. So either way, in this matchup, I think Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are a start with either quarterback, Matthew Stafford or Carson Wentz. Matthew Stafford should be starting. He's back. He's good. He recovered, which start him up. I love it both. Cooper Kupp especially, but it's that dynamic itself will change the offense because with Brett Ripien, they just weren't moving anything. It looked horrible. It looked bad. He's just not a good quarterback, unfortunately. So it's exciting to have your star quarterback back.
Say if he gets hurt again and Wentz comes in, how do you think the offense would look differently with Carson Wentz at the helm compared to Matthew Stafford?
Um, I think Carson Wentz can, push it down a little bit further. I think he has a little bit more juice with him. Stafford does have it, but we know Stafford's battled through those shoulder injuries and everything, so he's more quick-witted bullets. I feel like so Wentz will definitely allow it more, but we may see less of the running backs because Wentz will maybe move around the pocket a little bit more than Matthew Stafford will. Um, but they'll have to protect him a lot more. Wentz is a little bit more fragile than Stafford. Stafford's like an Iron Man. He's going to take the hits and he's going to continue to play. If it's up to him, he's probably never coming off the field. Where Wentz, he's had some injuries in the past. He's a little bit rusty, so you don't want to necessarily startle him right away. So you're going to have to work on the offensive line to protect him a little bit more there.
Yeah, I'm Stafford's one of the toughest SOBs in the league. Like all the injuries he's dealt through in his years of just taking punishment in Detroit and then coming into the Rams, like you just gotta respect that guy no matter what. Even if you don't think he's the best quarterback in the world, the guy is tough. Like he will get on the field no matter what. Battle through like a broken back, he still plays. Like it's remarkable watching him still just do the things he's doing, the injuries he's been through, and still being a high end quarterback. Like it hasn't been the
Right.
best for fantasy. I'd say for like either one of these quarterbacks really. Like Geno Smith has had his struggles this season where it's been very up or down, particularly third downs. Like that's just been an enigma for Seattle. They can't convert third downs. So, I mean, they're hoping to get that fixed against the Rams. We saw how that went week one. That did not get fixed. That was a major problem for Seahawks in week one. So now that they have both tackles back healthy, like it makes a world difference and they can sit back and protect him. So ideally, then you let the receivers get the matchup that dictate and they can kind of succeed. So I'm pretty curious to see how different this game is going to look compared to the earlier season. I expect it to be drastically different. Obviously, it's a division battle. These teams know each other through the years, so it should be a very fun contest.
Right.
For
I
me,
think.
like with I'll say like using Walker, and we'll kind of pivot to Charbonnet too a little bit. It's interesting how they're kind of bringing Charbonnet along, where they need
Mhm.
someone that kind of like wears on the defense and grinds on defense, which is Charbonnet's specialty. Like you've seen a couple hits he's
Right.
had earlier in the year where he's absolutely destroyed guys.
Right.
Comparing to Walker, like and his explosiveness, because he brings a different element to this offense. Like they
Yeah.
theoretically they desperately need, right? Like every team needs that explosive element. That's where he specializes in. Might give you a
Right.
negative 2 yard play, and they might give you a 25 yard run. That's just kind of is what it is. So we'll see if with JSN's like his ascension and he's been seeing more routes, more snaps and stuff like that, if they're going to use more like through wide receiver sets in this game. I would like to think they are. We thought that they were all year, but that hasn't really, that hasn't been the game script and what they've gone. So ideally, I think they're going to maybe emulate the Rams a little bit this week, where that's something the Rams are particularly known for a lot.
Right.
And in fantasy, I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup. What do you think kind of the Rams' strengths on offense are against this Seattle's defense?
Well, I mean, just to talk about the wide receivers, I think this is going to be a good wide receiver battle for the Seahawks. I mean, the Rams secondary has struggled this year. They really don't have anyone out there outside of their safety, Jordan Fuller. So this is an opportunity for them to bring on. If Lockett's questionable, I do believe. So if he
Yep.
is unable to go, or even if he's a little bit, banged up with the lingering injury, I mean, DK, JSN, and even Jake Bobo should have some targets go their way this game because, again, there's really no one that excites me in that secondary for the Rams right now. I think that's something that they addressed during this draft or definitely in the offseason. So I think they will use that. Whereas, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, they're going against Aaron Donald, right? They're going against Byron Young, who's been a great rookie linebacker. So it's going to be a little bit harder for them to get through that line, I think, than it used normally. So I think this could be a wide receiver thing for them. The Rams offense, I really think the running backs are going to have a huge day. I think this is a show out game for Darrell Henderson. I think this is a game where he has to say, look, I need to step up and I need to show him a value to the team. Kyron Williams expected back next week, right? Whether he is or not, we'll find out, when that time comes. But if he is expected back, I was averaging 16 carries a game, so he's their workhorse back. He's going to be using that. Where Henderson needs to go out there and show he hasn't been as efficient. But down the stretch, the Seattle's running game or running defense, has been pretty bad. At first for the first 4 games, they were averaging 79.2 yards per game to running backs. In the last 4, I think they've allowed over 162 per running backs. So they've just struggled. They've kind of done that. A lot of that comes from Keaton Mitchell when they played the Ravens. He went ham on them, had over, I think, 200 yards or something. So he just went crazy for them.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a battle where Darrell Henderson's got to show out. I think this is all about him. This is something that he needs to showcase. Look, y'all brought me back for a reason. Even if Kyron Williams is here, that's fine. But y'all brought me back because y'all trust me in this offense. Y'all know I can carry the rock. Y'all know I can do good in this offense. So I think we go on him. I mean, the secondary is pretty good for Seattle. I do love the wide receivers here, but for them to be able to open up Seattle and just kind of mess with them, open up some play action opportunities. Henderson's got to get the ball going. And hopefully we don't see Freeman, get those goal line work. We could see Royce Freeman in there as well, get some goal line work. But overall, I think this is a game that we can actually see Henderson possibly get over 100 yards. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and like that was the biggest reason why they traded for Leonard Williams is because man, they were just struggling in the middle, and they also weren't generating pressure really up the middle too. So it was kind of a double take. It has not worked that well yet, and particularly like we saw just the Ravens just absolutely just obliterate them. I mean, Gus Bus had like a 50-yard rush, and if Gus is taking it 50 yards against you, like you're screwed up because he's a good running back, but he's just not explosive. But yeah, they're still working on figuring out the best way to kind of work that defense, contain it, and not just get gashed. Because you don't want to end as a defense being second and third, like second and 3, like 3rd and 1. That's just problems for you. And then that's why they're near the bottom of the league in third down, like conversion rate. Like they just continually get the third downs. They stay on the field, and like offense, it just starts wearing on you towards the end of the game. They're gashed, and like they have nothing left. So that's kind of been the biggest issue for them. Where both teams have like both sides of the ball have been really up or down. So ideally, they need him to come through. I'm very worried about our linebackers in this matchup, particularly because the way the Rams use their wide receivers, like that middle of the field we saw in week 1, it was just wide open. Like we saw Puka, it's just wide open. Nobody was even like near him in the middle of the field. So ideally, they're probably going to structure their defense a little bit different in this matchup. I mean, that's the hope. We'll see. Sometimes Seattle is pretty stubborn with how we play defense because we play a ton of zone. So ideally, they work on some of those issues. They need Bobby Wagner to be Bobby Wagner once again. Even though he's older, he's still one of the better linebackers in the league. So if he can help, that guy can make a world of difference. But yeah, like the back end's good. It's more the front seven. Like that's what worries me. It's like we have Witherspoon. He's one of the better young corners in the league. Reek Woolen has been struggling this year, so he has not lived up to what we thought he was. So it's more like instead of having like one of the top 2 corners in the league, we have one good corner and one that's very up or down depending on like the matchup. So, and with how the Rams, go ahead.
No, I would say Reek was a rookie last year, right? If I'm not mistaken, he was what? Did he get Defensive Rookie of the Year? I feel like he may.
No, he was up there. Went to Sauce Gardner, but he was like in the conversation. Yeah, like, and I mean, I don't blame him. Sauce Gardner's incredible, so it's really hard to argue that.
And with him, he just outplayed his draft stock, right? I mean, he had a great year. Don't get me wrong, but he was also a day 3 pick. So he just outplayed that draft spot for him. You're talking about Puka Nacua too, right? Where we could see something similar where he's doing great and everyone's excited about him. But are we more excited because of his draft capital that was used on him. Because if he was a first round talent, it's expected, right? But because he wasn't, it's like, wow, look at this blow up that he did. I think that kind of goes in with Reek, where now it's like, okay, teams have tape on him now in the NFL, so they know what kind of corner he is. So that's why you could see some struggle, and we could see some similarity in Puka. Speaking of your linebackers, there, Higbee may be a sleeper threat here this week. Higbee doesn't really get off the field. He doesn't see less than 85% of snaps. When he's playing with them. So he has the opportunity. We know he's one of Matthew Stafford's trusted targets. If the wide receivers aren't there, he's not afraid to throw to Higbee. He hasn't really seen anything outside of that week 4 matchup where he saw 11 targets. He hasn't seen anything close. His closest one has been 7 targets. And then last week he only saw 1, or week 9, excuse me, not last week. So there's opportunity to shine there for Higbee. Will it happen? I don't know, but if you have a dart throw, he's a nice dart throw to have this week.
Yeah, and like with the Seahawks tight ends, they're just rotating them through. They're lining them up a lot, like they've been used heavily this year, and that's because of the line issues. So they've gone to like 2 and sometimes 3 tight end sets, and like part of that is really hurt JSN because he's coming off the field because he's not a good blocker. Like that's not why they have him.
Yeah.
And that's why you've seen more Jake Bobo on the field, right? Because he's one of the better block. He's a giant. He's like DK Metcalf size. Like he's another just giant individual out there who's a good run blocker. So that's why we see him, and he's like a fun end zone target because basically he's like a tight end out there. So if you want to really throw a dart throw in this game, like you could do that. But the floor is 0 targets, like 0 receptions. It's just that's kind of what it is with Jake Bobo. So it's interesting, like comparing Puka and JSN, the difference of how JSN has struggled and slowly come along, and Puka's been like basically like he was the round 1 guy. And JSN has been like he's like the day 3 guy. So it's interesting seeing the dynamic and how those two have been used differently. And obviously it was a much easier like path for him. He didn't have 2 really good wide receivers in front of him. He just had 1.
Right.
And then Kupp got injured, right? So it kind of just worked out for him. But he's been anything you could have asked for. He's been incredible. And yeah, it very much reminded me of Rick Wall last year, right? He's just a focal point on offense, and it's trouble. Like going against like 2 really good wide receivers, like that's a problem. Like the way that, and you have a mastermind McVay, like he sets them up so well. Like it's just fun to watch.
I think if you put JSN in Puka's situation, if he puts him on the Rams, you put Puka on there, we might not even talk about Puka. Jake Bobo could be the threat there. But we just, he ends up being the better receiver. But because JSN, to me, I knew that going in, that he has Lockett and Metcalf. We're not going to see him. But the hindsight was at Ohio State, he was better than Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. So it's like the opportunity's there. But again, it comes on how they play it. And I just don't feel they've been playing with JSN necessarily in there as much. So it's like, okay, as more as we get comfortable and become more past that, because they are more so a running team, become more past that and trust in Geno to throw it out. But he's an older quarterback, right? You don't want to necessarily aggravate him or anything like that, especially because he has had some injury history. You don't necessarily want to have him stress out that arm. He threw for a lot last year. I don't remember exactly off the top what it was. Let me see here.
Yeah,
Geno,
like 572. Yep, there it is.
So he threw.
Yeah,
just crazy numbers, right? And that was like, okay, we've never seen this side of Geno. But also it's like, okay, let's take it back. He's not necessarily a young gun where we could just say, hey, let's go out there and sling it every year. So take it back a little bit. But I think that there's opportunity for JSN. If anything, part of me would say in fantasy wise, if you can go out there and trade Puka Nacua for JSN plus because of the struggles, I think you have to necessarily do that because I think there's a clear path because of the draft capital they did. So they're more invested into JSN. So you may have it where if Cooper comes back healthy, we may just see Puka come down, or if they go after a running back. I think a lot of that Puka volume came from Matthew Stafford and the way he hyper targets those wide receiver ones for him. Because if you necessarily put him on, let's say, you could say Seattle, let's even say like New England or, something like that, where there's not necessarily a QB1 that's hyper targeting those type of receivers, then his value goes down. He was in the right situation. It looks great. He's a great talent. But I think as a fantasy perspective, you want to sell high rather than hold it off and then be like, damn, now I'm here with him.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's a former University of Washington player who transferred to BYU. So like we saw him up close and personal. He just kind of basically got buried with the coaching staff. It didn't work out and like consistent injuries. And this happened to BYU too. He didn't play much. So like it's a very small sample size. So I could see why he went late in the draft. But you see why he's a good wide receiver, the things he did. And then you put him in the perfect situation with someone who McVay, they know how to scheme him up and they're going to give him those targets. Like it's just it's an ideal situation for a rookie wide receiver to come into. And it's like, hey, he's good. Like at this point, you just know you have a good NFL wide receiver. Doesn't mean he's going to be a wide receiver one his entire career, but he's going to be a good NFL player. And that's found money. And so like whenever you had that, and this goes back to Seattle back in the day, when they had that 2012 draft and like they just took off, like that's what happens when you hit those guys, and it just snowball effect, right? So it sets them up down the road. But yeah, like I'm a big fan of Puka, and like the way they use him, like it's just really fun to watch. So having two of the better like wide receivers in that situation, as opposed to Seattle, like we have some good wide receivers, some very good wide receivers, just don't pass as much. We're in a very tough situation where we have like San Francisco, Dallas coming up, and like those are some difficult games, so they're gonna have to pass more. Like they can't just grind it out. Like those teams are too good. So we'll see how this works for JSN moving forward. But I'm excited to watch him, and maybe he can take a little bit more role and grow and become a fancy viable asset. Because at the moment it's really up and down with him.
Yeah, agreed.
As far as like we can hit on like IDP for a little bit, I guess. Who are some of like the Rams IDP players you would be willing to play in this matchup, or at least like put an eye towards?
Byron Young is definitely one of them. When we're talking about, let me pull up his stats real quick. When we're talking about just tackles, I mean, that's typically one of your biggest things when it comes to IDP. So Byron Young is one of those guys where I feel he's going to go out there and get a bunch of them, especially with your team that's looking like they want to run the ball. He's their middle linebacker. He stepped up. He's a rookie, just having a good year. Aaron Donald may be someone you can be interested in just simply because he may get to Geno Smith here and there. He's definitely probably going to get something behind the line because, they like to run the ball, and he's the one that steps it in there, and does all the run stops for that team. I think last time I looked, he had 40. This was before week 9. He had 40 run stops, and everyone else on the defensive line, or the other two guys on the defensive line, had 20 together. So he's definitely a force in the middle for you. And then Jordan Fuller, if you need a defensive back, he's a good one too. The hesitation will be, seeing if Seattle actually passes the ball and uses that. Again, I think, the secondary for the Rams is their weakest part. So Seattle could definitely go out there and try to expose them. But at the same time, I don't necessarily know if they do because I know they like their running backs. So Jordan Fuller is my hit or miss. He could have a great game if they try to expose him. He's the only guy I like in that secondary. But if they don't, he's not necessarily someone that's going to be running up to the line or anything to try to get that. I think you're looking more into the front 7 guys there for him. Yeah. What about you for Seattle?
For me, I mean, it's obviously Bobby Wagner, and he's like, if you're looking for tackles, like he's the guy. I think I'm looking at stats right now. I think he's got 92 points on the year for your traditional IDP leagues, but he's got 50 solo tackles, 45 assists, like 4 tackles for a loss. Jordan Brooks has actually been pretty similar, but realistically, like they're giving you 10 points a game. It's not great. If you're looking for someone to like that actually from the D-line perspective, it's Boye Mafe. He's got 7 sacks. He's got 10 like quarterback hits. Like he's pressured the quarterbacks a ton. Like he has one of the highest win rates in the NFL for pressuring the quarterback. So like if you need a defensive end to kind of get you the sacks and those big plays, like Boye Mafe is the guy that I would look at this game because he's been, frankly, our best pass rusher. Like throughout the entire year, he's been consistent. He had a sack, and I think it was like 7 straight games or something, where it was just every game he's making his impact felt. So like of all the defensive ends and those guys on the team, I mean, Leonard Williams is like it's a fun option to think about, but realistically, he doesn't finish enough plays. He'll pressure him, but like, he doesn't make enough like tackles for a loss or anything like that. It's him. And then on the back end, it's like Witherspoon. He's just the best defense D-back we have. Like we have some good, Jamal Adams, those guys. Trey Brown's made some plays, but Witherspoon's by far the best guy in the back end that we have. So like if he can get an interception in this game, like I think that would be because Stafford will turn the ball over occasionally. That's kind of he's got a good arm, so he's not afraid to sling the rock. So and if you wanted someone to do it for an interception, maybe you throw a dart at Witherspoon and see how it works out, just because he's a good, talented player who can make a play at any time.
And I forgot that Ernest Jones is coming back. He missed week 9 as well with a knee injury, but he's been logged in on full practice since Wednesday. So, I mean, he's going to be someone that's back in there too. So fire him up as well when it comes to those linebackers. Just when you have a team that runs the ball like Seattle does, I mean, your linebackers are money, in my opinion, because especially the ones that know how to track the ball well, and Ernest Jones and Byron Young both do. So I think those are good plays for you here for them.
Yeah, I think those are both good plays this week too. Like if I had them in the IDP league, like I'd happily fire them up because they're going to get opportunities, and that's like the biggest thing in IDP. So if you get the opportunities, that's what it's all about. How do you kind of? Yeah, Wagner's been like an IDP stud for like it feels like a decade plus at this point. Yeah. I think we got him in 2012. I think if I might be off by a year, but yeah, every year he's been consistent. You know what you're getting out of Wagner. He fell off a couple of years ago. Went to LA. It obviously did not work out. Came back like. We're very happy he's back in Seattle because if this linebacking core without Wagner would be in serious trouble. Like it would be
Well,
a disaster. So
he was in the Legion of Boom, wasn't he? When they had everybody, wasn't he
yeah,
part of
yeah,
the
he
team?
was
Yeah,
like
so he's
he was a rookie right when they took him in the second round. So I think it was the Russell Wilson year. It might have been. Yeah, they took Wagner in the second round. They got Wilson in the third. So like those two pairing together like set them up for just a decade. Like that worked
yeah.
out incredibly well. And he's been anything you could have ever asked for. He's still one of the clubhouse leaders, even as like veteran age. Like it's nice to see. It's just like the old times with Bobby Wagner. Like it feels like nothing's changed. Even though he left, came back, he's still the same guy. So yeah, like that was one of the bigger questions we had. Like, can he get back to the form he is? And he's come down a little bit. He doesn't have the same speed, because he's older, but he's smart. He makes all the plays in the world. So yeah, you fire up Bobby Wagner. He's gonna get tackles and looks in this game.
I think you brought up a good point there, just going back into a time machine, where they drafted Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. How important are those roles in the quarterback and linebacker? Just have two leaders just step in and just change the way that whole franchise is, right? I mean, it just what they were able to do both offensively and defensively and lead them on both sides of the ball is a game changer, So, I mean, just a note for all teams, if you're looking to replace or go after a franchise quarterback, make sure, you can go after their wide receiver or a running back or something like that, someone protect them. But something big is having the same leader mentality on that defensive side too, if you don't have that already. Because I think that, like you just mentioned, just for decades, it changed that whole situation in Seattle for them.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's like knocking out the park, like a draft, and then it was kind of up and down since then. Obviously, it's almost impossible to repeat that success in the draft. But like the interesting thing about Wagner, he's more of a quiet leader. He's not a very vocal guy. It was like him and Chancellor were the quiet leaders, and then of course it was like Sherman and Earl, who's just these nutcase dudes that were just yapping left and right. But yeah, it's and I could go on this for hours and hours talking about the little guys. But yeah, Wagner, he's just a good player. Like he'll be in the Hall of Fame one day. Like we're just happy to have him back. It's what it is. How do you think this game's going to shake out? Do you think the Rams are going to, since they're the home team, do you think they're going to win this game?
Well, I think this is more of a must-win game for the Rams than it is Seattle. Seattle is already right now they're in the playoffs, right? So the Rams are still in the playoff race, and having that bye week, they have an opportunity to say, okay, we're fully rested. We need to come out and win. Especially with having that extra week off, I think there's really no excuse for them to necessarily go out this win, especially being at home. If we were in Seattle, sir, we can do a different story, but I think the Rams have to pull it out, and I think it's going to be closer than we think, but I think they'll have like a 23-17, 20 win, something like that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. As confident as I want to be in the Seattle squad, like they still have question marks, they have holes, like they're nowhere near a perfect team, right? And you've kind of seen it up and down, particularly when they go against good competition. Like the Lions shred them on defense, even though it took a while, like they barely won that game, they held on. The Ravens just absolutely obliterated them. And so if the Rams were able to kind of show some of that, like the offense that we've seen, and they keep their foot on the pedal, like it could be a rough day for Seattle's defense. So they're going to need to make some big plays. Like I think that's going to be the turning point. It's whoever makes a big, like a sack fumble or someone makes an interception, like that could be the difference in this game. I think they're pretty evenly matched, and they both have strengths and weaknesses that go against each other. Obviously, like I think it's going to come down to the fourth quarter, and you have Geno going against Stafford, and Geno, he needs to be consistent in this game because he'll make like 2 or 3 boneheaded plays each game. So he needs to just clear that up. So hopefully it doesn't cost him. But yeah, I like that. I like a kind of like a low 20s game. I think. I'm not sure the spread on it. I think it's pretty close for him, which I should have this.
Real quick.
Blanking on it right now.
I think with Henderson, with Stafford coming back on the first week, Henderson's going to need to do something in the running game to at least get some pressure off of it. Because it's going to be telling to see what Matthew Stafford is right now, see if he really is back or if he does have something bothering him, if the injury's still lingering. And if so, that can hurt them more than it can actually help him having him in the offense. So just to get some pressure off of him and try to, ease him back in, Henderson needs to have a good game, or they need to at least get the running game going. Maybe it's not Darrell Henderson, maybe it's Freeman, maybe it's someone else, but they need to have some kind of running support in this matchup. We can't going out the first week coming back from Matthew Stafford's injury or second, and he had 2 weeks, but having him air it out and go crazy with it, ease him back in, let the running game do its work, and then we may see maybe a bigger victory than what it is. But yeah, the low 20s seems right now.
Yeah, because like their running game has been like not super efficient the past few weeks. Like they've very much struggled trying to run the ball and establish that. And, part of that is the issue with Stafford is injuries and stuff. So like if they get that back and going, it'll help. Like even in week 1, they weren't super efficient in the running game, but they got it done when they needed to. and they were able
Yeah.
to continue those drives. And then Stafford just was Matthew Stafford. It was just like,
Right.
oh yeah, this is
Just
the Rams a
yeah.
couple years ago where they were just like we just couldn't stop them. So yeah. So if you have Stafford back, I think that makes a world of difference because he is still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. I know like people are worried about him, but like I've seen enough of him. Like I trust the talent. Like the guy's good. Like he's just a good quarterback. And if a good quarterback's hitting and we don't get him off a spot, like it's trouble. That's what it is. So yeah,
He's one of
on the
those.
flip
If
side,
he's healthy, I was say if he's healthy, he can still play another 4 years, as long as he's healthy though. But the thing is, he takes his hits and he battles through them, so he's not going to play another 4 years, I don't think. But if he is healthy and just stops getting hit, yeah, we can see him in the league for another 4.
yeah, I was actually about to ask you about that because yeah, like he's dealt with injuries nonstop. Like there's been like some murmur about him possibly retiring, with that just because he's older. He's already won the Super Bowl. Like he's done everything he needs to do. But yeah, I mean, if you get him for the next 4 years, like that's incredible. Like you have the talent, you have the skill players, you got to just keep riding that as long as you have it because as we both know, when you don't have a franchise quarterback, it's a disaster. It's impossible. Like going into last year, this is what the surprise was with Seattle. I thought it was going to be a dumpster fire like Geno Smith or Drew Lock, and thankfully it's not Drew Lock because I don't think he's an NFL quality quarterback. But yeah, Geno, like he did everything and then some. So him repeating some of that success from last year, I think goes a long way in this game. Yeah, it should be. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's a division game. They know each other very well. I think it's going to be a fun matchup, like however it goes down. If the Seahawks win or if the Rams come out on top of this one.
Luckily, this is a deep quarterback class, so if there are rumors about Stafford retiring or that he's saying, "Hey, I'll play one more year," go out there and get a quarterback. He can probably be a great mentor. He's been around the league. He knows a system. He has a great IQ. So go get one of these quarterbacks that are coming out, not in the first round, maybe in your second or third round, because there's still some talent there. Mocks have had Shadir going to there. I don't think Shadir comes out. I think he goes back. But I mean, if you go out there and get, Michael Penix because he drops, maybe even McCarthy because he drops. I mean, I would love McCarthy there. I think JJ McCarthy would flourish in that system with Matthew Stafford after Matthew Stafford's time. But, having that guy that's done it, won the Super Bowl, also been on the bad teams, been through it, been hurt, been, basically done it all in the NFL. I think you got to get one of those quarterbacks this year in the draft, and that way they can be groomed by Stafford.
Yeah, I think if Penix goes there, I am going to worry about him because they're going to need to shore up that line because he can't get off the spot. Like his mobility and his athleticism are nowhere near what it was when he's coming out of Indiana. So like like his completions, like almost 90% of them are basically like the first or second read. Like he's not moving off his spot; he's hitting those. So whoever drafts Penix next year, like they need a good offensive line. Like they got to protect him because it could just be a disaster for him. But yeah, like I think that's if they do end up going with a replacement, it'll be fascinating to see how the offense looks without Matthew Stafford, right? And you transition to a new quarterback and do that. Kind of what Seattle was doing last year. I mean, obviously Geno Smith was like an 8-year veteran at that point, but he hadn't shown anything. So it was basically for us, like we're getting a rookie or second-year quarterback and seeing how this goes. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. As we see with certain teams, like even, Carolina, they're struggling with Bryce Young at the moment. So yeah. And with Seattle, like we have an out if we ever wanted to get out of Geno Smith, like it's $17 million in dead cap after the season. So if they wanted to move on, they totally could. I just don't know with like where the draft pick's going to be, who's going to be available, and if they're willing to take that because there's other spots they can spend on, right? So it's going to be fascinating, like offseason for both these teams. I think, like the quarterback situation in general is going to change up everything.
For Geno, he hasn't necessarily. I mean, he got his extension right. He hasn't done anything this season to say, "Okay, we're done with you," But he hasn't necessarily done anything and say, "Okay, the extension was worth it," either. So it's kind of like he's in that fence moment where it's like it wasn't a bad choice, but right now it's not necessarily a good choice either. He could have went a different way, spent that money elsewhere. But I mean, he's still a serviceable quarterback. You can still plug him in your lineups. But yeah, I mean, same situation where I think if you can get that opportunity to get one of these quarterbacks in this draft, I think you have to take it. If even if it's like say Michael Penix, say if it's Jaden Daniels, you have to take it because this class is right now drastically more talented than what the 25 QB class is looking like. So, if you don't take him this year, then you're possibly stuck with him again next year. And then you have to wait again for that 26 class, right? So, I think if you can get it, it's just not that they'll start Geno's still good, but I mean, I think if you need him, there's about like 12 quarterbacks, I think, right now in the draft that I'd take over Drew Lock, just off the top. There might be more, but just off the top, I'd take them over Drew Lock. So
Drew Lock is he's just not good. Like I know people were like excited for him last year, and I was like, dude, I don't know what you watched on tape, but it was rough. And so and like immediately like Drew Lock shows up, and they're like, oh yeah, Geno Smith's running with the ones. I'm like, okay, that's all I need to know. Like we've heard enough. Like we're good on this.
Right.
So yeah, it'll be if they do like get that ability to move on, like an upgrade quarterback, they absolutely should take that. I just don't know if it's going to present that to themselves because it's gonna like, particularly if they're moving up in the draft significantly, that's gonna cost a lot. And we saw how it works out. Like we're still horrified from the Jamal Adams trade and that like disaster trade. Obviously, we had the Russell Wilson trade. That one worked out pretty well. It set us up. It helped this rebuild extend it and move a lot faster. So it can go both ways. But I think we're okay with Geno. I know it's kind of been up and down, but it's getting to that point. Like, do we think we can win a Super Bowl with Geno Smith? And I don't know if that's a realistic possibility. I think that's the more of the hard part. Like Stafford, he can take it up to a different level. Like, I don't know if Geno can go there. So like that's kind of what we're debating here in Seattle. Like the roster's pretty good. It's just we're waiting on to see if Geno Smith's that guy. If not, then you move on. You try to find that other guy. Yeah. So it'll be an interesting few years for sure, particularly with the 25 class looking not so great for quarterbacks.
Right. Because their receivers look good, but y'all don't need any receivers. Y'all have good receivers right now. So
no, yeah, like we're set up. And like Lockett though, so the interesting thing, Lockett started to fall off. Like he's starting to regress a little bit more. Like the last 3 years, his numbers have kind of gone down and gone down. So JSN, like by next year, should kind of like pass him on total bowl. He should be at least the number 2. And I think by 25, he'll be the wide receiver 1 on this offense. But it's just, in fantasy, can you wait that long? Like with Dynasty, like we see it, it's just like, oh yeah, this guy, nope, I'm done with him. So I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out for them. But yeah, if we ever want to like build this offense up and have those guys be dependable high-end wide receivers, like they're going to need to adjust and like probably move on from, like realistically, I think that because they're just running too much and, it's just you see the issues kind of with the offense. So I think that's kind of an interesting like dynasty way to look at it particularly. So for I guess from a dynasty perspective, who are kind of someone from the Rams you're looking to buy and one person you'd be looking to sell?
I mean, kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I think Puka, if you can sell something of value, I would love a first for him. If you can go and still get a first from him with 24 first, go ahead and do that. I think that's great because this is a talented roster. And if it's a top 5, top 6 because of the season he had at the beginning of the season, by all means, that's a smash, right? I think you have to take that. Mm-hmm. If it's a late one, you could question it, maybe try to get a third back or a late 2. But I mean, I think for Puka, he's definitely a sell high. Nothing to knock on the talent, but again, I just feel if Cooper Kupp is healthy and Stafford's healthy the rest of the season, Puka's volume is going to go down. We're just going to see him more, naturally go towards Cooper Kupp. And then also, if we see a different quarterback that isn't Matthew Stafford there, I don't have that much value in Puka as far as I would Cooper Kupp just being the dominant wide receiver there. So I think he's someone you can get if you are buying low on anybody. Probably Henderson. I think Henderson's good, but again, with Kyron back, this is someone's probably not going to sell him right now. So if he has a good outing, that may be somewhere where you can go and sell high as well. Or if next week comes out and Kyron's back, but yet Darrell Henderson's still there and you just need a backup running back, I mean, he's someone that you can probably buy super low because it's like, okay, he's not going to be there next year, but go throw a 4th round pick at him and just capitalize on it because if Kyron has any source of slowing down or anything like that, he's their back.
Yep. Yeah. What about you? So for me, like the guy I want to get rid of is DK Metcalf. He's reaching that age point where he's pushing into like the age 26 season. And when you do that, and like in Dynasty, how we treat these wide receivers, right? Once you start getting that age and you're not giving the high-end production, the value kind of erodes. So while he still holds that name cachet, I would look to move on from DK Metcalf. Like I think he's a good player. Nothing against DK Metcalf, but it's just more of the situation. And if he's not giving you the fantasy points you were expecting, like he did a few years ago, where he was wide receiver 6 on the season, like that just doesn't seem like it's realistic range of outcomes. Like he's a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 weekly for me. So if you can move him, like get a plus on top of a younger wide receiver, go do that. Or just flip him for a younger wide receiver, like go do that move. And then on the flip side, it's JSN. Like I'm still trusting on the talent and the young player. As fun as Walker is, I'm worried about him and Charbonnet. Like we didn't really hit on this, but like just the amount of work he's going to see, I think Charbonnet is going to cap him from a ceiling perspective. So JSN's the one I'd be willing to, like I know his value's down the tank. Like late one, if I can get him for late one smash, like I'll do that all day, and then I'll just roll with JSN for the next 5 years, right? So, and that's just more the age dynasty game. But I think JSN's a very talented wide receiver who we haven't seen the best of yet. So it's going to take time, but it'll come. Just patience, and like I think you'll be very happy with him long term.
I think he's still 21 too, right? So he's still young. So I mean, that's always good when you can cash in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you get it for the next, 5-6 years minimum. You just roll with it.
Now, if you had, let's say, Puka Nacua, I would trade Puka for JSN, but because Puka's had a better season so far, I would ask for a little bit more. Would you trade JSN for Puka if you're competing? Let's say if you're competing, would you do that, or would you do it for something different?
So like in my dynasty rankings, I have Puka ahead of JSN. So like realistically, if I'd flip those, I'd flip them like no problem. I just think it's a much easier path for Puka to like be the guy. And obviously there's risk with the Stafford situation, but on the same side, like we have Geno, there's some risk there too. So I'll just trust I'll get the contending piece and go and get that production, and I'll live with it. Right. And I know not everyone's willing to do that without the draft capital. Like they're miles apart in draft capital, but like I'm fine making that swap. And I think that's realistically a pretty easy swap you could do. In certain leagues, like in some of my like analyst leagues, people freaking love Puka. They're like, he's top 5 wide receiver. And then in my home league, guys are like, I don't even want Puka. And I'm like, okay, like it's a massive range of difference, right? So it's all league dependent. But yeah, I think that's an interesting like pivot point to go off of those two, right? Or you could do that. Or, and I think like Stafford's a good one too, because he's old. People don't like him, but if you need a quarterback, like you know what I'm saying? Like any possible 4 years you're talking about, like I would love that on my team.
Would you rather have Stafford or Geno rest of the season?
Stafford. I trust that offense more. Like the last week, I think that's the high point of Geno's season that we saw. Like that Washington defense is boring. And it took Seattle, it was 9-9 at half. Like it was not good. It took them a while to get going. I just think it's just he's not enough pass attempts. He's too inconsistent. So it's really up or down. Like he's going to be like a mid-range QB2 for me most weeks. And Stafford, I think he can give you a higher ceiling, particularly like we'll see. Like they have the ideal game trip coming up for Geno to just kind of pop off. But like what I've seen this year, I'm just not 100% confident in it. And he's not really young. He's not old, but he's in that in-between ground, kind of like Dak Prescott, right? Because he's pushing like age 30. So it's like, is he old? No. Is he young? No. It's like, don't have the value. So yeah, if I was contending, I'll just take Stafford and I'll just ride however short that window is and go with that. Would you make that move or would you just keep Stafford?
I would keep Stafford. I mean, I think it's just more so because your offense is going to run through Stafford for the Rams, where the offense isn't necessarily running through Geno, it's running through the running backs. So for that reason, I think you may get more upside in Stafford, just reaching with his receivers. As long as Cooper Kupp's healthy, I mean, that's always a great and a plus. And then now he has Puka Nacua, who's looked great, right? So now he has 2 good receivers, which is something he had Robert Woods, and stuff like that. And we saw the success he had when he had 2 of those type receivers. So this is something where it can be something similar down the stretch. As long as he is healthy, I think he's good. Now, if you're afraid of the injury, I'm not mad about going out there and trade for Geno, because if you think, oh, well, he may get banged up or something again, then sure, go do it. But because of Seattle being more running back dependent, I guess you can say, with Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet, I think you can trade Geno, and I would do the same thing.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like for Stafford, I think like he hasn't hit the actual points perspective of it, but like he's looked better. Like I was watching the 2 quarterbacks play. I think he's played at a much better level than Geno Smith. But the fancy points, you're like, oh, he hasn't really been that good. But that's just lack of touchdowns, and that was Kyron Williams getting all the touchdowns the season. I think is more.
I would say if Kyron came back in next week and he just has an explosion game, just goes off, I would go try to sell him. I think, you sell him at the high, just be like, look, try to find a contender that needs him. Go out there and be like, look, I'll trade you this. You're probably not getting a first out of him unless he goes for like 200 yards or something crazy. But even then, I would go out there and try to get a couple chews for him or a low end back that's not necessarily producing.
Yeah, if you don't need the points on your contender, you should absolutely just get out from him. Because day 3 guy, like they're just not secure. So like in the Rams, they find a running back next year, like that comes in, like they're going to give him an opportunity. And if that happens, like it could be done for him. So yeah, 100% with you on that. Like I would get out from him. On a contender, yeah, I'll go throw a second at him, see what works out. If it sticks, cool. If not, then it is what it is. But is there anything else you want to hit on for this breakdown?
No, man, I think that was a good breakdown. I think we covered all grounds, and hopefully our teams and our players show out. Should be a good divisional game, and may the best team win.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is our Week 11 High Point Sports breakdown between the Seahawks and Rams. I'm Jesse Muller, aka JMuller5. That is SC Romero. You can find him on Twitter at the PPR Show. And yeah, take care, folks. We'll talk to you next week.